important conversation. And I can't thank you guys enough. We've got Minneapolis, we have LA, and we have Turks and Caicos. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I think we'd all love to be there. So greetings to those that are joining us. Thank you for coming to be a part of a really important conversation. We've lost over 500,000 people here alone in the United States. And it has been quite a ride, I know, for many of us. Isolation, mental health issues, Mr. Floyd's murder kicked a lot of this, obviously, off in terms of all the things that we're journeying through. So it is important for us to finally really spend some time looking at the importance of community. Because if there's one thing that I think many of us have started to realize, the absence of it certainly doesn't get us where we need to go as a society. So it's a real blessing to have my guests join us. Mir Harris, thank you. I know today was hard, so thank you for joining. And Mir has been in my life for, wow, almost 5 years now. And Mir and I met in Los Angeles when I lived out there and had a chance to see her brilliance in an artistic way, but she has also been a guide for me with a lot of her wisdom. Mir also was featured in the New York Times just recently, having launched an audio production and performance of The Lion King on Clubhouse. That was major, with a lot of other amazing creators that co-created together something that I don't think has ever been done. So thank you, Mir, for joining. And then we have Dr. Paul Campbell coming to us from a really important city now within the cultural conversation, Minneapolis. And so grateful to have you raising and I need to make sure I get this right, $50 million fund, which is incredible, for Indigenous, Latino, and African-American members of not only Minneapolis, but also nationally. So Dr. Paul Campbell, thank you for joining us. Amanda Slavin, wow, we go way back. I don't even want to say how many years it's been now. Amanda and I met at a group called Summit Series. We became sisters immediately. And so grateful for your brilliance. And Amanda has done some extraordinary things working with corporate America, which is an important stakeholder in this community, and really doing some phenomenal things with our mutual friend who's transitioned, Tony Shea, in downtown Vegas. But her work with Zappos is just been talked about over and over, and she's continuing that work. So Amanda, thank you for joining us. Okay, guys, let's get in it. So we're gonna come off mute and we'll take care of just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat. We're gonna start some introductory conversations, and then we're gonna just dive in and really start to really unfold and peel back how we can reweave community after such an extraordinary journey. So I'd love to start, Paul, I'd love to start with you. And I go back and forth from calling you Dr. Campbell, but you always push back on me. Just call me Paul, Carla. We're gonna call you Paul. But you are coming in from a pretty intense city right now. The trial's going on. So how are you doing? And also just share a little bit about what you've been working on.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. And thanks for having this conversation. I think it's extremely important for people to begin to think through critically on these issues, because a lot of the problems that we're seeing do come from a lack of relationship and intentionality in terms of community development. So obviously the city is on high alert. Again, we know the eyes of America are on us. There are many folks from different sides of the perspective are coming to this conversation and showing up. but there's also people showing up here somewhat exploiting the visibility of this trial and everything. And so in our community, we're very careful to ensure that, one, we respect the Floyd's family and walk through with them through this journey where we're at here today. So I just want to say that we appreciate the attention, but also it goes back to why we need to form community. So the Brown Venture Group, the work I'm doing now, the reason why we focus specifically on this demographic, as obviously there's been data out there showing the fact that this is one of the most underrepresented, underfunded groups of contributors. And I say contributors because I think that's what it boils down to. We're trying to essentially unleash the suppressed contribution of people group that can not only benefit communities of color, but quite frankly, all of American and all of the world. And so that's what we're really trying to do. And we know there's a tremendous upside potential with that. So we have a $50 million fund that we're raising and have good traction with that. But really, as we're raising funds, we're actually talking to the community and say, look, guys, what we've done in the past has not worked. And why that has not worked is because we have a lack of relationship. So though people see what happened with George Floyd, they want to rush out to make solutions. And I said, we can't skip the relationship step. We have to form this, and make sure that we're co-creating this together, because you've seen Rodney King, we see other situations that happened in the past, and we still see this recycle because the problem was still too vague. So in the work that we're doing, we're getting a lot of great support from the local community now. We're having conversations, and quite frankly, it's kind of twofold. We're educating people on the importance of community, and at the same time trying to raise a fund. So it's not just raising a fund, there's a lot of work to be done in that, but we've been seeing some great success. And I feel like with even this conversation here today, kind of highlighted the reason why we need to build relationships and do things stop doing things for communities of color, which we've historically done, and really shift our thinking to do things with communities of color, because that means we can really improve economic and human flourishing for all.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's the perfect segue, Mir. You know where I'm going to go, right? So Mir Harris, can you share a little bit about your journey as an artist, and not only an artist, I mean, you have been a strategist for a number of communities. It just recently, let's be clear, you led a lot of the work that happened with the Me Too movement right at CAA. So can you share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? The air conditioning in this hotel room is a little loud. But yeah, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here and to further this conversation and to kind of build upon what Paul said. In every iteration of impact work, let alone the intersection of entertainment and impact work, I've realized, to his point, it's not just relation, it's people want to jump and feel compelled to jump at a problem, but they're so layered, they're so complex, just as people are. And so now I've kind of, through all of that work, whether it was Time's Up and realizing that women weren't in relation to each other, especially across racial and ethnic lines. You had women who had been forced to compete for the one spot for decades. And now we're at a table trying to solve some of the biggest issues against women and needed to learn how to relate to one another. And it was very difficult to bear witness to. It was very difficult. It still is. To be perfectly candid, I think we've seen a lot of moments like that in points of contention in society where people do what they know, which is build brands, build campaigns, but we're in a situation and a time and an intersection in society and in the world where we have to fix people. We can't go about fixing any of these problems with such varying, depths of understanding, varying levels of comprehension. Just this morning, I was in a conversation that was talking about the diversity of sonic sound and how the nuances of putting forth a voice of America that is traditionally cis, hetero, male, and white, what that does to the detriment, let alone how, certain advertisers making choices or encouraging voiceover actors to do Black scent, how that deepens and further embeds stereotypes that we have. So I use these varying examples just as much as the work that I've done with various people, whereas I've always tried to focus on the feeling and how people will walk away from the experience or away from the dialogue or away from the exchange, because we have to be moving to a place where it's less about beating people over the head for what they don't know, and more about every exchange, we all walk away expanded in some way. So I'm excited to kind of get into that. And I think, fundamentally, we've had a lot of conversations that artists and creators are the catalysts for a lot of that understanding. Whereas we don't necessarily, get into the weeds. We're more right-brained than, I probably couldn't really talk to Dr. Campbell about raising, but I could probably put on a show that could divert to the raising, you know what I mean? And so we're at a place where we really have to combine our efforts, combine our talents and our strong suits so that everybody is catching up and not just the woke few.
Wow. Drop. Amanda, that was the perfect segue to you, because hello, a lot of what you did in downtown Vegas and what you do in general is you appreciate the artists. You appreciate those that can make the investment in creating an interwoven community. So I'll pass the mic to you.
First of all, Mir, I'm like fangirling because I've only heard you and never seen you because we met on Clubhouse. So talk about community. I mean, I've just been hearing you and promoting you and amplifying you and support. I'm like, this woman is unbelievable, but now I'm seeing you. So I'm just really excited. Literally fangirling. So that couldn't have been a better segue because, there's two things that I'd love to just bring up briefly, and I do actually have to talk about Clubhouse and Mir and Lion King in this. I know I'm going to let you share the whole thing. I don't want to give too much away, but I'm type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed 4 years ago out of nowhere with type 1 diabetes, and as a new mom with a disease during COVID, I was really, really scared early on and felt really isolated. And I am someone that has always really committed to building community, and yet I felt really disconnected from community. And so Clubhouse and Mir actually gave me so much light in a really dark time. So I just had to say that's the beauty, right? It's I call it ROI, ripple of impact, not return on investment. Like, you can't measure the feelings that listening to Lion King with my new son, I get emotional, gave me during these very, very difficult experiences mentally, emotionally, and physically for so many people. So thank you. That's it. That's all I have to say. No, I have a master's in curriculum instruction. I was a teacher, and I actually created an engagement framework to measure learning, because I feel that standardized tests limit us, especially, I believe every single child on this earth has the potential to grow and to learn and to be successful, and we limit that understanding of them by standardized tests versus actually really looking for what does it mean to get them to their potential by us working on ourselves, not blaming them, but actually looking at us and saying, what can we do to improve? What can we do to be better? What can we do to connect? So that was my beginning. And I then took that framework and applied it into, as Carla mentioned, community building in Vegas. And like Mir, when you were talking, I was like, yes, there are levels, and it is about being able to reach people where they are and lift them up. But it's also about recognizing those limitations and those pitfalls and those frustrations and what is getting in the way of that connection, and being able to really, again, look at yourself and say, okay, what can I do to improve, to get better, to connect? But also then for people such as yourselves, and I'm going to keep using Mir as an example because I experienced it so personally, also have people around you that recognize you and support you and promote you, because the work is exhausting. So that's what I really love to do, is to find those individuals that are the community builders and help them build community, if you will. So I think, Carla, I mean, I could certainly go a lot of directions, but that's what I'm saying for this part.
No, I appreciate that. And what's powerful is that we all have this background, with community. There's a lot of work I've done, as you guys know, in helping to build certain projects and programs within community. There's something that you all sort of touched on, which I think is so real, is that we have to start with self. And no matter how much we pull together these wonderful panels that are happening all over the world and people come out for it and everything, we often miss talking about ourselves as it relates to how we build community. And it was really something wonderful when I had the chance to meet my now uncle, Chief Phil Lane, who is one of the most powerful indigenous leaders throughout the world, and along with John Raymer, who's done extraordinary work within the models from a technical standpoint of community. They wrote a paper about, from an indigenous standpoint, right, about how do you build deep social networks, both online and offline. And as I was reading the paper, and I'll make sure all of you guys get it, and I'll make sure I'll put this in the link, it was powerful because that's what they started with. There's no way in the world you can think about showing up for community in the way that you want to show up if you don't handle what's going on internally. And a lot of the functionality many of us might have experienced as children show up when we're trying to create relationships. So you know who I'm going to turn to, Paul. Okay, I know you have a lot to say about this, because the other hat, you haven't said who you are, but you know, you're a man of the cloth. You've journeyed through that space, and I know you probably work with a lot of individuals.
Yeah.
So please share.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think that I'm trying to, even with my own children, they're very young, and we we go around, we talk about metacognition, which is funny, I'm saying it online, but that's what we talk about. That's essentially thinking about your own thinking. Like, it's so important. Like, even from my faith perspective and the faith journey, there are people that really have a passion around the faith, and before they even get to their spiritual text that they're looking at, they have to understand what's informing their worldview and how they see this opportunity and or this text in front of them. So when it comes to this area too, it's so important to know why you believe what you believe and how where you grew up at, right? For example, I grew up in Minnesota and Virginia Beach, Virginia, and they have two different cultures. And how does that culture affect the way I view, interactions between people, power distances, right? In business, you talk about doing global business, and you have to understand what countries you're going to and how they view women and men and interactions. And so it's so subtle, but one of the ways I get people to think about this, I give them an example. I said, hey, if I told you right now I work with at-risk youth, what's the first image that comes to mind and why? And you pause and you think about it. The question is, why is that image in your mind to begin with? And how can we disentangle those two things to realize what's going on in the background? Because as we have authority figures in our life that we look up to, that we're not questioning them on why they're doing what they're doing. For example, we have no choice to where we live. Our parents made that decision. Right. And then how does this choice actually impact when it comes for the leaders to say, you know what, I can't find a person of color to fill a key role, or I can't find an investable company. Why can't you find that company in your thinking? And you start realizing it's not an issue of availability, it's just proximity. So you have to be more intentional what you're thinking. So the reason I'm bringing it up is because as you begin to figure out how you think, and you have that self-awareness, that helps you when you're going to conversations, whether that's in sales or business or whatever it may be, to figure out what's going on here. Why am I feeling this way? And then how is this other person responding, from that perspective? So I think it's very important to know how you think. And I study behavioral science very in depth. And that's what informed my decision to do Brown Venture Group, because I realized instead of trying to attack racism head on, for example, the best way to do it is bypass it cognitively. When you solve a problem using technology, no one knows the color of your skin. All they know is to solve a problem for you. And that way it's less of a barrier for you to come up with. But I think it's very important for you as a contributor to know how you think.
And so okay, and so how we're going to do this, guys, if you feel moved to weigh in on that, go ahead. Mira is going to hand it over to you, because you and I late at night have had so many good juicy conversations about making sure we're all wired and feeling stable before we just show up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think even before you head into these conversations, we have to give ourselves the grace of understanding that we are simultaneously unlearning, learning, and trying to autocorrect in real time, which is tremendously difficult. No other generation in human history has ever had this level of technology and just even recording, you know what I mean? To be able to watch ourselves in real time, to be able to react in real time. We've seen in real time, what has happened with the George Floyd case, with even before that, between Egypt and protesters here in America, and how they were communicating as things evolved. And it's sad to say too, the level of awareness as well that, it doesn't hit all the way until it hits your siloed experience. And we've seen some of the conversations in recent weeks with the Stop Asian Hate campaign. And I think we're just now scratching the surface of what it will take to restore universal humanity. Because up until this point, there are so many humans that, unless you were, deeply aware and sought out that level of wisdom and understanding, or unless you were directly affected by it, ignorance was literal bliss. You could go on. And now we're at a place where you can't run away from it. It's on your phone, it's on your TV, it's on your newspapers, it's on the radio if you're still listening to it. And so it's calling for a deeper level of self-exploration, to your point, and a deeper level of cognitive awareness. But to both, Amanda and Dr. Campbell's point, we're not all taught the same. We're not all exposed the same. And that's somewhat by design, right? And so I like to sit on the belief system that the very same things that got us here and made things this bad are the very same things that can help us get back to balance, because it's not about being, this homogenous, same belief system populace. It's more about we've tipped completely out of balance of human understanding. And so how do we use all the tools at our disposal to get us back there? I fundamentally believe that we can now galvanize the people, the things that folks are paying attention to, and infuse that with a curriculum for change, with, rudimentary psychological tools. Like, it takes the human mind 12 times of repetition to remember something. If we can do the same things for capitalism and advertising and consumerism, we should be able to do the same things for human compassion, empathy, and survival through some, our darkest days of those living right now. And so I do think that being able to put a lot of dense information, what is the saying? Like, can you explain it to a 5-year-old? We should be able to start synthesizing information into simpler ways so that we can broaden our understanding and people can be more equipped with choices. And I love that Dr. Campbell, I don't know you very well, so I'm not going to call you Paul, but Dr. Campbell brought in, faith into the conversation, because as somebody who grew up Buddhist, my relationship with God is very young, but I was only able to come into it because of, one, my personal experience with God in my life, and two, having a pastor, Ture Roberts, who specifically went about running a congregation that was not traditionally churchy, that was not traditionally condemning, that was not traditionally, how religious people should act. It was more, these are real things that happen to real people. Here is the word of God and how you can apply it into your life as a fellow human being like Jesus once was, and be able to synthesize these things into a deepened faith and relationship with God that essentially is human, whether you call it God, Allah, spirit, source, what have you. This is something that is out of our words and that is easier to understand when we strip away just one way of looking at it. And I think that that's the same for living as human beings. And so we have to be able to explain things in the simplest way possible.
I'm so happy that you both spoke to this very important point, because we often poo-poo. We have, as Chief Phil would say, and John Raymer, a very linear perspective of this. It's either win or you lose, period. But yet our Indigenous relatives come at it with a very holistic understanding that the entire system, the entire universe is working in one. We have the ability, right, to recognize all living things, trees, water, as real live beings, not just things. So this is an interesting space to start exploring spirit. Okay, so Amanda, over to you, because I thought you were going to come through from Turks and Caicos.
I'm clapping. This is how you clap in your house. I'm muting and unmuting. Wow. Okay, we went there, which was so amazing, because I'm like, I've said these things in private, all of the things that you're saying, but never really in a public forum, which is really exciting to be able to have real conversations about how we're actually feeling, not just what we're thinking. So, I would like to build off of that, where when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, again, don't really talk about it publicly. I don't share about it again in kind of business settings, but I was very, very active in the 2016 election and was pre the election, and I was very angry because I'm very I'm an empath in a lot of ways, and I take on a lot of people's feelings. Truly, like when I'm crying, I'm not crying because it's about me. I'm crying because I'm feeling something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. All I could do is feel. And so I would just listen and feel, and I was so angry for so many of these community individuals in my life that I really cared about, and I was really supporting, that I was very, very actively angry on social media and was saying very, very, maybe not hurtful, but just, again, I'm going to keep using the word angry. I was just angry. So I was just sharing and sharing and sharing, and I was extremely angry. And maybe I was attacking people on social media here and there and just saying, I disagree with this, and very, very, like, was very assertive. And so when I was randomly diagnosed with this diabetes that was not in my family, it was totally out of nowhere, the diagnosis was essentially that my body was attacking itself. And when I received that diagnosis, I was like, I have been attacking humanity. I have not been listening, not been receiving, I've not been acknowledging, and I've not been, I've always learned as a teacher, it's unbelievably important to listen first and then speak. And I was just speaking and speaking and speaking. And when I received that diagnosis, it was really God was speaking to me and saying, you can't do this anymore. You have to slow down and be, as Carla mentioned, I just lost my mentor and business partner, Tony. So I'm a little emotional, but you have to listen first, receive first, and then take a step forward. So I learned a lot about that through the work of Downtown Vegas, through Carla's mentorship, but I also learned a lot about that through the physical manifestation of, a message from a higher force that showed me, not with words, but with actions.
Why don't we talk about this anymore, guys? I'm just realizing, right? We don't talk about spirit. I mean, Papa raised me in the church, right? Born Baptist. Then I will say I lost 7 women in 2 years back to back. Amanda, you might remember, when I shared a little bit of that with you back in the day. But what was deep is I got the real efforts. I'm going to keep it 100, right? And then I just started going into robotic mode. Boom, boom, boom. Working at Ogilvy and Mather. I still love them, like just all about getting stuff done. That's my thing. Let's get something done. And as we are talking about this rebuilding and creating a more connected culture, it's not just about the PPE or the stimulus or the best economic development models that we want to set up and all the ethnographic studies, and what we're missing, that conversation about we as an individual, right? And then also spirit, this other thing, it sounds like, right? I don't feel like we talk about it this is like the first time I'm like, wow, it's really going there in our conversation right now. We're talking about community and, and creating community all over post-COVID. We're actually landing on a conversation around the spiritual nature of that process of how you start with self and then bring it to the table. Paul.
I gotta say something, because this is obviously my thing. I think in our American culture, you have to understand how the culture was created to begin with. It taught us to bifurcate or separate these elements of our life, and we've been lacking because we haven't bring whole selves to work. Our contribution. I give you an example. If you work a traditional job, you go out, you come back from the weekend and say, "How was your weekend?" Or you come back the next day, "How was last night?" or home. And then you go home and they say, "Well, how was work?" But they still want you to separate the two, And I learned a long time ago, one of the best ways to motivate your employees is to focus on intrinsic motivators. And you can't focus on intrinsic motivators until you know who that person is. So I spent a lot of time developing people understanding who that person was and how to motivate them, because carrots and sticks don't always work for people, right? And you can produce higher contribution when you're focused on an intrinsic motivator. I believe part of the thing is we're unaware how this bifurcated or separated avenues of our life has actually hurt us. And so when you look at like Jewish cultures and other and indigenous cultures, for example, it's whole life. Even the Muslim faith, it's a whole life type of thing. And when you separate, there's a lacking. And so I feel like part of this, like you actually, it's counterintuitive to think that bringing your whole life to work will actually make you a better employee because you're taught to separate the two. But in fact, it actually does. So I don't want to talk and beat a dead horse, but I feel like if we can figure out as a society that one, bringing my whole faith to work actually makes me a better employee to get better results. Like when I'm number one in sales, it's not because I was trying to get the money, it's because I actually listened to my customer. And that's what made me number one in sales, because I care about people. And so the people was my motivator. The money came, but that wasn't my motivator. The people were my motivator. So.
Go ahead, Mir.
Oh, no, I was just going to add to that as, you know, going back to like the things that were used to harm us can be used to help us, right? Like one of the first things I noticed in the pandemic and in quarantine was that people had a really hard time grieving being busy. And a friend of mine and I would joke, we saw this one meme that was like, you're not bored, you're boring, which was a harsher way of saying people were now forced to face themselves. To Dr. Campbell's point is that a lot of us had, you know, consumed by how busy our days were, how we were going here, and there and doing all of the things. But a lot of people were lacking. They were ignoring their mental health and their physical peace. They were ignoring disconnects from their family or their significant other. And it's almost as if, you know, this higher power gave us this grand reset, right? Like before the conspiracy theories of it, we literally had time to sit and think and reset ourselves in a different way and also a different time. But that's an esoteric conversation for another day about the age of Aquarius. But I point that out to say is like, we had an opportunity to evaluate what didn't serve us. Like growing up in a society that is governed by capitalism, which by design is not to serve humanity. It's not even for the greatest outcome of humanity. It is to serve and yield this 1%, and it does exactly what it needs to do. Now we're in a time where we're seeing, okay, this doesn't serve us. Something hits and we're all in this similar boat. Very few of us are really thriving in it. And even still, we're seeing, you know, new waves and new iterations and new things now as the vaccine goes. And there's still some people who want to return to normal, right? And so how do we, to the point of blending the two, right? Or even worse, we're taught this fake sense of privacy as if it serves us, and you have people privately going through depths of darkness and pain by themselves, just because we haven't normalized. It's okay. It's not a burden to talk about how this is affecting your spirit. It's okay to acknowledge, you know, I don't feel so hot today. Like I started getting my friends to stop saying you're fine. I'd rather, you know, or I started saying when people are like, how are you going? How are you doing through the quarantine? How is it affecting? I'd say I'm navigating the waves. That was a more honest answer for me. I wasn't fine. I wasn't great. Some days were darker than others, but it would come in waves, like grief, like pain, like suffering, like all these things that are inherently human. But for some reason, we've made them so socially terrible to talk about, as if we're going to hinder, when in reality, everybody's going through it, which is the crazy part. So, you know, I think it really does come down to choices, and the choices that we continue to make. And to your point, Carla, or your question rather, what does it take? Why do we avoid these conversations? I think it comes down to courage, because people have been taught and conditioned to be afraid of what is most natural. And that is something that we definitely have to shatter, let alone teach and counteract, as we're trying to effectively change the world.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think your point about what's natural is dead on. We are avoiding what comes natural to us, and it's time to take off the mask. So I want to transition a little bit, because guess what, guys, we're running fast out of time. So Mir, I do want to pick it up with you, and then I'm going to go to Amanda, and then to Paul. Mir, you made a decision to do something that just landed, you know, in New York Times as a really important moment for artists. Can you share a little bit about the backdrop of how that even came to be? Because you're right, a lot of artists were suffering during this time. What made you kind of go down that road?
I mean, even myself, I, through the magic of Clubhouse, realized how much I was suppressing artistically that freed me. And in the last few months of 2020, I got onto Clubhouse, which, if people don't know, is an audio drop-in app. We like to joke, it's kind of like Soho House got a party line. But at the time, it's still beta, technically. It's only for iPhone users. And back in fall, I had already started to develop a community with my friends in late nights, early mornings. And then I met a few other people who were holding jam sessions. Of those folks, Bumani, who would later become one of the app icons while we were doing Lion King, Noel Chestnut Whitmore, Chris Boogie, Miles Greer, and Cam Dela. All were in this room, and they had I missed the first night. The first night they had heard Chris Boogie's voice. He sounded like Mufasa. They reenacted a Lion King scene. The next night they played it for me, and Noel was like, we should really do this. And I was like, I want in. Now, from the very onset, the goal of it was to, one, introduce Chris to an alternative lane he had never thought of for himself in voiceover acting in a time when we were all trying to pivot and figure out the next move. We didn't know at the onset. So many of us were struggling, had lost jobs, had this, that, the third. Even some folks who were housing insecure had no idea. We were strangers, complete strangers. And the emphasis was really like, this year sucked. It was a lot to contend with. The holidays are coming and they don't even feel like the holidays. What can we do to bring joy? Everybody loves The Lion King. So we held auditions, and the auditions inspired us more. And then we opened it up, ended up having a cast of over 40 strangers that rehearsed over 50 hours to do 2 shows the day after Christmas, which was also the first day of Kwanzaa. The coolest thing about the experience was, one, maintaining that intention the entire time. Like, this is about bringing joy to people. This is about doing something really cool. I don't even think we realized, like, we knew it was going to be a thing, but we didn't realize how big of a thing. But that combined energy from, again, strangers, like, the first time we all got on Zoom was like, oh my God, I've been hearing these voices for months. This is crazy. And we pulled it off, and it ended up being like #2 trending under just the NFL on Twitter, and getting over 56 million impressions. And still to this date is the biggest thing that has ever hit Clubhouse. But the coolest feedback was we made it more accessible for folks that have different levels of abilities, whether it be visually impaired or hearing impaired. Folks that gave us a compliment. They could close their eyes. They felt like they were at Pride Rock. Folks who were taking care of elders because of the time. And, one woman told us she was sitting with her grandmother, and her grandmother started crying because she was like, this is like when I used to listen to the radio with my parents, and they were reliving these moments. Folks were just going crazy with the messages. And then the kids who it was newest to, had this whole new thing, and this new thing that they could do with their parents. And so I walked away just, one, how the power of intention can change and shift and literally move things. Because even in the wake of it, everything that everybody was trying and is still trying to do and accomplish and produce is incredible. But 2, how something so simple, like, a lot of people think you need capital, you need millions of dollars, you need the entire plan. You could just have a good idea to bring joy to people and do it and watch the ripple. I love the ROI. I'm stealing that, Amanda, because it's so true. And at a time, I don't think anybody involved, let alone that got to witness it, realized how much they needed something that was just pure, unadulterated joy. And what better than an animated movie brought to sound? So I'll never forget it.
That is awesome. And you didn't get paid. You used your skills, you used your time, you tapped into community capital, and we'll spend more time a little bit talking about that. But that is powerful. And now what we're hearing is there are some potential social mobilization moments happening with individual artists, and being able to actually get paid gigs as a result, or an incredible program that you're going to tell us about right before we wrap, that you're doing now as a result. Amanda, over to you. And when I think about the $350 million investment that our beloved Tony made, in downtown, and you came in and you literally started to look at how do we start to build not only the buildings, but the soul within downtown. Can you share about that story?
Yeah. I do have to just say, though, because I love Mir, please take Ripple of Impact. Everyone take our Ripple of Impact. That's the point. I have to just say, about that intention very briefly. That framework that I mentioned, I wrote a book about it. It's called The Seventh Level. And there are 7 levels of engagement. The 7th level is defined as literate thinking, when your personal values and beliefs align. And the whole framework begins with identifying your own 7th level statement. What do you stand for? What do you believe in? And using that as the North Star in which to connect with others. And that's literally the entire book is around your internal customers, your employees, bringing your full self to work. It's like all of personally incentivizing that. Those are a higher level of engagement. If you financially incentivize, it's a lower level of engagement. So this whole thing, I'm gifting everyone the book. I'm so excited. I want to have a 10-hour conversation about all of this. But for right now, Vegas. My intention in Vegas, when I first, I had a very weird background. I was in teaching, and then I was in hospitality, and I opened restaurants, and I helped produce a nonprofit music festival, and I had organized a TEDx, and I had done all these weird things and produced summit series, and I was just really confused on how it all fit together. And when I met Tony, who had this vision for, his was ROC, return on connectedness, and collisions, and instead of Ripple of Impact, and this idea of building this community for I think that word shifted a lot as he realized that word is has a lot of interpretations and a lot of meanings based on who you say it to. So there was a community before Downtown Project existed. And that was something that I really wanted to be intentional about. So my role was to create experiences and opportunities for people all over the world to come learn about downtown Vegas, and then give back for 3 days, a month, twice a month for 2.5 years. By the way, bring your whole self to this experience. My son is crying in the background, so if I seem distracted, that's why. But the whole point of it was when these people would come, I would always say, this is like a time-sharing program. I'm asking you to share your time. I'm asking you to come and learn about what's happening in downtown, ask questions, as I've said before, and then give free talks, free workshops, mentor individuals here. But before you do that, learn and respect and recognize that they know a lot more about what's happening here than you do. And I actually, when Tony passed away, I received so many messages from so many people all over the world reaching out to me because I had hosted so many people in downtown Vegas. And one was this man, Derek Washington. I don't know if you remember him, Carla, but he lived in downtown and he was very frustrated that, he had been there for years. And, when I first went to downtown in 2011, the cab driver said, I'm not dropping you off there by yourself. It was the middle of the day. He's like, I don't feel comfortable dropping you off. And I'm like, no, I think it's fine. I don't know. I'm just kind of just ended up here. But I'm sure it's okay. I'm a New Yorker, whatever. My family's from the Bronx. I'm tough. He's like, okay. And so when I went and I learned about what was happening, again, there was a city there. There was a community there. And so Derek was there before Tony, before Downtown Project. And he was disgruntled and he was frustrated. And what I did was I reached out to him. I said, attend the Catalyst Weeks that we were doing, these events, meet these individuals, give a talk, share your story, participate and be an active participant in the growth of what's happening here. Because no one else within these kind of formal roles gave him, actually Christine's a participant, he gave a talk at one of her experiences and delivering happiness, an Inspire talk. And she's on here right now if you want to message her. Everyone should know Christine. And he messaged me when Tony passed away and said, that changed my entire life. That was a huge catalyst for me. I ended up, running for, public roles within policy. I've now been changing downtown Vegas from more of the government perspective. He's like, and that really just being seen, just being heard, just being given a chance to have a voice and to be an active participant in shaping community wasn't about money at all. I didn't have the money to give him. I didn't have $350 million. I just had a stage, a platform, and a place. And I also had other individuals' attention, time, and efforts that they could then place upon that individual. And when I realized that, I was like, Oh, I can actually change people's lives and I can catalyze people's lives. And my company's called Catalyst. So, Mir, when you said Catalyst, I'm like, yes. But I can catalyze people's lives through recognizing that they have a lot to say, have a lot to offer, and then giving all the resources that I have through community building to support them. And that's what I did in downtown Vegas for 2.5 years. I moved there. It changed my life. I committed and dedicated those 5 years of my life to downtown Vegas. And anyone that ever wants to go to downtown, you just let me know. I have a lot of connections for you and it's a whole new world. That's your next, Mir, that's your next production, Aladdin.
Yeah, there we go. I already see a collaboration here, guys. Paul, go ahead.
I didn't have a chance to meet Tony, but he definitely impacted my life and some of the messages that he had out there. And it really, I think of contribution, right? Even your platform, Carla, what you're building essentially is you're creating we talk about the knowledge economy and the industrial economy. This is a contribution economy, and that contribution is so unbelievably important to make and create really innovation and economics to work. And I give you an example. This right now, our whole theory of business is predicated on two thought leaders in management. It was Frederick Winslow Taylor, number one, scientific management, and Henry Fayol over in, I was getting his name wrong, but Henry over in Europe. And it caused people to work in silos. You talk about government silos, you talk about big corporation silos, and that's not how humans innovate. And so you see, even when it comes to, and I just let you know, I'm a retired music producer, so I'm a right brain thinker by nature. It's this whole idea of making mashups. You can't make mashups in silos. So like when you look at what Tony did and having that open concept in terms of the environment, those serendipitous, natural, messy relationships that happen can only happen in a place that's devoid of those silos. And so I really feel like there's an element to that we need to get back to as a community, because I know even for Brown Venture Group, I'm not a rugged individualist. I have three other partners that make me a better contributor. This is not about one person. And I think I shared with Carla, I actually don't like being in the media, just my picture, because I think that reinforces this message that you have to be a rugged individualist and there's nobody behind you helping you out. No, I'm working alongside people, and it's all about contribution. And if we want to create more innovative thinking, we have to learn how to destruct these silos, not only in business world, but in the community. And so as people think about Brown Venture Group, yes, we're focused on the BIPOC community, but we're also focused on inviting people to the space in the Impact Hub in Minneapolis to say, look, if you want to make an investment, that's one thing. Money is not the biggest issue we're talking about. We're talking about relationship, because relationships, trust, you can't have a trustless economy and have money work. It doesn't work that way. And so I love the idea of building community, not because it's just a heartfelt story, because that's actually how breakthrough innovations happen, all the way back to the printing press. If you look at it, the printing press, right, it was a mashup of ideas. You had Chinese who invented ink, you had woodblock printing, you had all the different things, and then there was Gutenberg was trying to solve a problem when it comes to education, right? There's a pain point he was trying to solve for humanity. Drinking a glass of wine, he says, oh, the wine press. Now you mash these things up. So I always thought, oh, I can see how innovation works. I realize it's because of my right brain thinking, but the whole world is trying to, even in education, they try to make you be, left brain thinking, right? And they don't set it up for that context. So my point in all this is that, as we move forward, we think about what's next, having innovation come to the table is going to take people. And even the creators of Skype prefer to have face-to-face meetings, because there's no taken away from that human interaction. We need each other. I need to tell you that I'm okay. And funny, as you guys are talking, people say, "How you doing, Paul?" "I'm terrible." "And you?" And I'd smile because they weren't expecting that. Especially and you look at Minnesota as an example. Minnesota is a place how could George Floyd be murdered here, essentially, right? Isn't Minnesota a place where they don't see color? Well, if you don't see color, you don't see me, right? Did you know Minnesota has the worst graduation rate for students of color in the country? How is that possible? Well, when you don't see color and you're not relationally connected to people community-wise, you don't know what the problem is, right? You just think it's some off-the-wall thing that happened down the road. But George Floyd happened as a result of people not being in a relationship with one another. And that goes, I know, Carl, you have members in law enforcement. When I gave a talk a few years back to the Chief of Police Association here in Minnesota, I said, you know, the interesting thing about this conversation is both you, the law enforcement professional, and my family members had the same pain point. Is my husband coming home tonight? Is my wife coming home tonight? It's the same thing from different angles. And until you start controlling your narrative, your own self first, right? And understand what's going on, until you realize we're humanizing people. They're not problems, they're people. People are partnerships too. We're always going to treat people like projects. We're always going to treat people like problems versus humanizing people. And I think one of the things I'm careful of is it's great to see a standing ovation, but if I get a standing ovation from people who think like me, I know I haven't done my job yet. I have to give to people who think differently from me to expand my ontological worldview and how I see things, so that I can make sure that I'm a better contributor. So I'm sorry, I just get passionate.
I was going to say, don't apologize.
Also, instead of headshots, Dr. Campbell, can we like have multiple heads, like a group shot instead of a headshot? Like, I love that, what you're saying, you know, when
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
it's such a thing. We always have to give a headshot versus like, no.
I hate it.
Whole team. I mean, it takes, I know, you know, just with our family, and we call each other the Ying family, right? One of my colleagues was just going to put my name, and I'm always like, nope, go ahead and put everybody's name, or at least the Ying family, right? Because it really is about that, guys. And, you know, we're coming and wrapping up time. So I'll ask the attendees, if you guys have any questions, please feel free, raise your hand or put it in the chat box. We created, to your point, Paul, a community capital engagement platform. And it really begins to activate and unlock the community capital right within our own networks. And that's been something that I've been journeying through for quite some time, you know, and I think in my life, there's certain things that happen within my family that really just re-emphasize the need for what I've been making in my family, all sorts of sacrifices to manifest this platform. And we're in beta now. We're 4 weeks before we actually come out and say hi to the entire world. But I'm so excited because we've had such incredible conversations with organizations, with businesses, with community about how we can start to unlock the time that people are willing to contribute to the contribution economy, right? Mm-hmm. And especially for such a time as this, time and skills are key, right? But most importantly, what's more important, I think, for all of us that are part of the Ying family working so hard to go ahead and get this out, is the fact that these moments of exchanges, these moments where we connect because of intrinsic value that we have for one another. You talked about the joy, Mir, like your face just lit up when you talked about the joy, because the artist in you got to express herself. And other creators that you've been friends with got to express themselves finally, and they didn't ask for a dime. That time, guys, we don't measure now. And my belief has been, we measure what we value what we measure. And wouldn't it be nice if people had two types of capital to look at on their balance statement? And that's what we're working very hard to bring. As we wrap, let's see, it'd be awesome to go to you, Amanda, because I don't know, this is our first time we did webinar, guys, so I don't even see if people can ask questions here really clearly. So, Amanda, last words. And here's my question to each of you. If someone came up to you and said, what's the recipe for how we begin to reweave the fabric of community post-COVID, what would you say those first steps need to look like? Paul, and then we'll close with Mir. Amanda. No, Amanda, you.
I'm going first. Great. Okay.
Amanda,
awesome. Yeah, I think, you know, I said starting with that 7th level statement, and what we've talked about today is going inward and asking, what does actually bring me joy? What does light me up? What does allow, you know, I will say I have a minute, right? I once spoke to this woman, Dr. Nadia Bowles-Weber. She's a pastor, and she's an amazing videos. I highly recommend her. And she told me that after she would give, these talks to 500 people in church, they would come up to her after. And if she didn't have the provision of God kind of working through her, she would be exhausted. And she would realize that she wasn't supposed to be doing it in that moment and she needed to go home. But if she had the provision of God within her, working with, like, she almost felt it within her heart, she had so much energy. And she's like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so asking yourself, it's not selfish. I was just talking about this with Carla. It's like, if you're asking, how can I serve? As Carla said to me, how can I be of service? That's going to then bring you joy, bring you energy, if it is the right thing for you. And I think really having that alignment is key so that you can then do the work. So as Mir said, bring joy to others. And I think, again, bring joy to yourself. So.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Paul.
I really think, going back to the earlier statement about relationship, we need to move, as my colleague, Dr. Chris Brooks says all the time, we need to move with the speed of relationship. We need to have grace for people who are uncomfortable in the space. After George Floyd was murdered, there's a lot of people who begin to ask questions that they didn't even know to even ask. If you think about it, you had other people have been murdered by police in the past, but it was because George Floyd happened after COVID, and there was a separation of relationship that caused people to begin to even have questions. What does it look like to have selective capitalism or selective democracy placed on a people group? And they exposed things. So COVID was a great exposer, but I think it exposed really at the core this deep desire for us to be intentional and to build relationship. And it's not a soft, fuzzy thing only. It's a very practical thing to contribute to your neighbor. For those people who retire, it's one of the most damaging things, because they think, what can I do? What's my value? How can I contribute again to my fellow man? And even if you get curmudgeon and you don't like people, the reality is you still need people around so you can complain about. Right. So I think this is a moment in our history. We can't go back to how things were done before. But I think how we do this is we come together and say, I know you're not going to know whether to call me African American or Black. That's okay. But if you would commit to the uncomfortability of doing this cultural residency where you're getting to know my community, my family, why I believe what I believe, where I drink coffee, or things like that, I think we're going to increase the probability of organic, natural relationships happening. And this innovation I talked about, where you have different perspectives, we're going to see better innovation as we learn to be better about being in a relationship with one another. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mir.
I would just close with, the quarantine kind of gave us the best example. We were all inside, determined upon who wore masks or not. And that's kind of like the perfect metaphor for how interconnected we are, right? The more we're able to take it on as our job, like I always hated in social justice issues where people are like, it's not our job to teach it. Well, it is, because we're kind of dependent on them learning. And so if we can transmute it into less of a laborious task and more of a labor of love, so we can all get to the place that we need to, I think we'll be in a better space. And then lastly, I would encourage anybody scared to do something to do it. I think that is kind of where we're getting more outliers, more teachers, more healers, more empaths, more voices that are able to lead us down the path more necessary, because they're breaking free from the conditioning of standing by and standing idle. And so the more we can be those examples for people, like I always like to say, like Tupac, it's less about me being the one, but if I can inspire the one, I would have done the job. So the more we can get courageous in that, I think we'll all be for the better. And of course, don't stop doing the work.
Wow. You guys have been remarkable. You're my friends. You're people who are really committed to this work. And it has been a joy to hold space at this moment. This is just the beginning. I get to see all of you on the platform, which is very exciting. And all of you who are listening in will be making sure that you get notified when it does get out there. Our focus is working with corporations, municipalities, and nonprofit organizations to finally bring another form of capital to our balance statements, so that as a society, we can be way more balanced. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really excited about where we're going. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.